Have you ever felt like no matter how much you give, it's never enough? You're not alone. Millions of men today are trapped in a silent battle they don't even realize they're fighting. A battle for their own sense of self in relationships that drain more than they give. You give your best. You try to be the protector, the provider, the man who never breaks. But every time you open your heart, you feel it slipping away. Her attention is never stable. Her affection comes and goes. And you're left wondering what you did wrong. Or if maybe it's just you who isn't enough. Carl Jung spent his entire life studying the forces that shape human connection. And he uncovered a brutal truth. When the unconscious runs the show, no amount of love or effort can save you. You're not just dealing with a woman, you're dealing with her shadows, her unresolved wounds, her hidden fears. And if you don't see this clearly, you'll keep giving, keep hoping, until there's nothing left of you. In this video, we're going to break down exactly why this happens and how you can finally see through the illusions that keep you stuck. Because the moment you understand Jung's brutal truth, you stop playing her game. You reclaim your power. And you remember, no woman is worth losing your soul. The silent sabotage. How modern relationships strip you of your core. It doesn't start with a scream or a fight. It starts with a smile, a sweet word, a promise of safety and comfort that feels like everything you've been craving. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, it becomes something else. A game you didn't agree to play, but somehow find yourself unable to walk away from. Carl Jung warned us that when we interact with the world, we're not just facing people, we're facing their unconscious, their past, their fears, their hidden wounds. And in modern relationships, that unconscious has never been more active or more invisible. Today's women are not just individuals. They are products of a culture that teaches them to chase validation, to use seduction as leverage, to see relationships as a game of power and control. And you? You're caught in that game, whether you want to be or not. You see it in the way she tests you, in the way she withholds affection when you don't comply, in the way her attention flickers, here one moment, gone the next. And every time you rise to meet her demands, you're not just giving her what she wants. You're giving her control over your mind, your energy, your very identity. At first, you don't see it. You tell yourself she's just complicated. You think if you can just be patient enough, kind enough, she'll finally see what you're worth. But that's the trap. Because the more you give, the more she takes. And the more she takes, the less of yourself you have left to give. Jung understood that the unconscious is never satisfied. It doesn't care about harmony. It only cares about feeding itself, about filling the voids it doesn't even recognize. And if you don't see this for what it is, you'll spend your entire life trying to satisfy a hunger that isn't yours to feed. This is the silent sabotage of modern relationships. It's not the big fights or the dramatic betrayals that steal your peace. It's the small daily compromises you make to avoid conflict, the way you hold your tongue instead of speaking your truth, the way you bend your boundaries to keep her close, the way you start to believe that her moods, her wounds, her shadows are somehow your responsibility to fix. But they're not. Because here's the harsh reality. Every time you abandon yourself to keep her happy, you're not just losing your peace, you're losing your soul. This isn't love. This isn't partnership. This is a war for your mind. And the only way to win is to refuse to play. To stand in the quiet, unshakable truth that your worth isn't measured by how much chaos you can endure. Because when you finally see it, when you finally understand that her moods are not your burden, her shadows are not your job to heal, You reclaim everything you thought you had to sacrifice to be loved. And in that moment, you realize the real power in any relationship doesn't come from what she gives or takes. It comes from the strength to say no to anything that asks you to become less of who you are. The hidden game, how her shadows steal your power. It starts so softly you almost don't notice. A glance that lingers a second too long. A smile that feels like a promise. A silence that makes you doubt everything you thought you knew. And before you know it, you're caught in a game you never agreed to play. A game where every word, every touch, every breath becomes a test of your worth. Carl Jung warned us that the greatest danger in any relationship isn't the obvious fights or the loud arguments. It's the unconscious patterns that slip beneath the surface. The shadows that shape every interaction, every conversation, every choice you make. In modern relationships, these shadows are more powerful than ever. You see it in the way she draws you in with her softness, then punishes you with her silence. In how her validation feels like oxygen when you're starved for attention, and how quickly she can take it away. You start to think it's about her moods, her past, her trauma. You tell yourself you're helping, that you're just being patient, that if you can just prove yourself, everything will finally feel right. But the truth is, this game has nothing to do with love. It's about control. It's about her unconscious need to test you, to see how much of yourself you're willing to sacrifice to keep her close. And the more you give, the more you lose. You lose the quiet certainty that once lived in your chest. You lose the voice that told you when something wasn't right. You lose the man you were before her shadows wrapped themselves around your soul. Jung understood this better than anyone. The unconscious doesn't care about your dreams or your peace. It only cares about feeding itself. And if you don't see this clearly, you'll keep giving until there's nothing left to give, except the hollow echo of your own silence. But here's the brutal truth. No matter how much you love her, no matter how patient or understanding you try to be, you can't save someone who's still at war with themselves. The only thing you can do is protect your own mind. That's why I created the SIM method, a 5-minute daily practice to reclaim your clarity and protect your mind from exactly these unconscious dynamics. You'll find the link in the pinned comment below, because when you finally see the game for what it is and refuse to play, you stop shrinking to fit her shadows. You stop losing yourself in the chaos. You remember who you were before the silence, before the tests, before the endless war for her attention. And in that moment of clarity, you take back the one thing no one else can give you: your peace, the weight of her silence, how you lose yourself without realizing. It's not the screaming or the fighting that breaks you. It's the quiet, the long stretches of silence that stretch on like an echo in an empty room. She doesn't have to say anything at all. Her silence is enough to make you doubt your own thoughts, question your own worth. You start to feel it in your chest. The way you tiptoe around her moods. The way you edit your words before they leave your lips. You tell yourself you're just trying to keep the peace. But deep down, you know it's more than that. It's fear. Fear of her withdrawal. Fear of the cold distance that feels like punishment for something you can't quite name. Carl Jung understood this intimately. He wrote that when a woman is ruled by her unconscious shadow, her power doesn't come from what she says. It comes from what she withholds. The warmth that vanishes without warning. The affection that turns to ice the moment you assert yourself. And you? You keep bending. You keep compromising. Because you think if you can just be what she wants, you'll finally feel that warmth again. But every time you shrink to fit her expectations, You lose another piece of yourself. You start to notice how small you feel in your own life, how the things that once gave you joy now feel muted, distant, like they belong to someone else. How your laughter doesn't come as easily as it used to. How even in moments of closeness, there's a part of you that feels completely alone. This is the cost of her silence. Not just the quiet itself, but the way it makes you second-guess your own mind. The way it makes you forget that you were never meant to earn love by giving yourself away. Jung warned that the unconscious doesn't destroy you outright. It destroys you by convincing you to abandon yourself, by making you believe that your truth is too much, that your needs are a burden, that your voice is a threat. But here's the quiet truth you need to remember. Love is never supposed to feel like fear. Connection is never supposed to feel like you're walking on eggshells. And the moment you see that, truly see it, you begin to remember who you were before her silence became your prison. Because the real tragedy isn't her distance. It's the way you slowly become a stranger to yourself, all because you thought her approval was worth more than your own soul. And once you name that truth, you take the first step back to yourself, back to the man you were always meant to be. The mirror of your wounds. Why you're drawn to what destroys you. It's a question that keeps men awake at night. Why do I keep going back to her? Why do I keep forgiving the cold silences, the quiet punishments, the unspoken demands that drain me every day? Why does her approval feel like oxygen, even when I know it comes at the cost of my soul? Carl Jung spent his life trying to answer that question. He understood that we're not drawn to people randomly. We're drawn to them because they reflect something buried deep inside of us. They mirror our hidden wounds, our forgotten fears, our desperate need to prove that we're worthy of love. You think you're choosing her because she's beautiful, because she's intoxicating, because she makes you feel alive. But the truth is, you're choosing her because on some level, she feels familiar. Her unpredictable moods, her sudden withdrawals, the way she can make you feel like you're everything and nothing, all in the same breath. It's not about her, it's about you. About the boy inside the man who learned long ago that love was something you had to earn, by silencing yourself, by shrinking your truth, by bending your soul until it no longer felt like your own. And that's the most brutal truth Jung uncovered. We're not victims of other people's shadows. We're participants. We're drawn to the very things that hurt us because they feel like home. Not the home we deserve, but the home we've always known. You tell yourself you're different. That this time you'll be strong enough to change her, to make her see your worth. But every time you give a little more, every time you compromise a little deeper, you're not healing her. You're betraying yourself. You see it in the way you start to apologize for things that aren't your fault. In the way you hold your tongue when you want to speak your truth. In the way you rationalize the coldness, telling yourself it's temporary, that if you're just patient enough, everything will be okay. But here's the harsh reality. It's never about the other person. It's about the parts of you that haven't yet been healed. The parts that crave her validation because you haven't yet learned how to validate yourself. The parts that confuse intensity with intimacy because you haven't yet learned that real love is quiet, steady, unshakable. Jung believed that the only way out of this cycle is to bring those parts of yourself into the light. To see the ways you've abandoned your own needs to keep someone else happy. To see the ways you've confused being wanted with being valued. To see the ways you've mistaken her unpredictability for proof of your worth, as if her approval was a prize you had to win. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You start to notice how often you've given your power away, hoping that if you just loved her enough, she'd finally become the woman you imagined she could be. But you can't love someone into healing their shadows. You can't sacrifice yourself to fix what was never yours to fix. The real question isn't why she treats you this way. It's why you let it happen. Why you keep showing up, even when every part of you knows it's killing your spirit. Why you keep hoping that one more act of patience, one more moment of understanding, will finally make her see you, really see you, and love you the way you've always needed to be loved. But the truth is, no one can love you like that if you don't first learn to love yourself that way. Because the more you abandon yourself for her approval, the more you teach yourself that your needs don't matter, that your voice doesn't count, that your soul can be traded for a fleeting moment of her warmth. And that's the real tragedy. Not that she can't love you the way you want, but that you keep choosing her over yourself. The moment you see that, the moment you really feel it in your bones, everything changes. You realize that no woman, no matter how beautiful, how intoxicating, how magnetic, is worth the price of your own soul. Because in the end, it's not about her at all. It's about you. About the man you're willing to become, or the man you're willing to lose, for the sake of being chosen by someone who can't even see her own shadow. And the day you finally see that truth, not just in your mind, but in the way you carry yourself, in the way you refuse to settle for anything less than real, grounded love, that's the day you become the man you were always meant to be. The cycle of confusion. You think you're making progress. You think you're finally getting through to her. There are days when she's warm, when her eyes light up and she lets you believe that maybe, just maybe, this time will be different. You feel hope stirring in your chest, that fragile flicker that keeps you tethered to her world. But then it happens again. A word, a look, a sudden shift in the air that sends you spiraling back into confusion. She pulls away without explanation. She withdraws her affection like a punishment, and you're left there in the silence, replaying every moment in your mind, trying to figure out what you did wrong. Carl Jung called this the cycle of the unconscious, a dance of shadows that repeats itself over and over until you finally have the courage to see it for what it is. Not love, not destiny, but a pattern you're stuck in because it feels safer to keep trying than to face the truth. You start to see how deep it runs. How every time you chase her approval, you're not really chasing her. You're chasing the part of yourself that still believes you have to earn love. You're chasing the ghost of an old wound, one that tells you you're only as valuable as the validation you can extract from someone who never really sees you. And that's why it feels so hard to walk away. Because it's not just about her. It's about you. About the boy inside the man who learned to measure his worth by how much he could give and how much he could endure. But here's the truth. No amount of effort can fix what she won't even acknowledge. No amount of love can heal a wound she doesn't want to face. And the longer you stay, the more you lose the quiet certainty of your own truth. You start to notice it in the way you hesitate before speaking, the way you swallow your words to avoid her coldness, the way you twist yourself into knots, hoping that if you can just be enough, she'll finally give you the warmth you've been craving. But she won't, because her silence isn't about you. It's about her. About the chaos inside her that she's too afraid to face. And no matter how much you give, it will never be enough to fill that void. This is the cycle of confusion, the endless loop of hope and doubt, of giving and losing, of loving and feeling like it's never enough. And the only way out is to see it for what it is, a mirror of your own wounds, a test of your own courage. Because the truth is, every time you stay silent to keep her close, you're teaching yourself that your soul doesn't matter, that your needs are a burden, that your worth can be measured by how much of yourself you're willing to lose. But the moment you see the pattern and refuse to keep playing, you take back everything you thought you had to sacrifice to feel loved. And in that choice, you begin to remember the man you were always meant to be. The false sense of security. It's strange how quickly you can lose yourself in someone else's world. How easy it is to mistake her attention for safety, as if her fleeting warmth is the shelter you've been searching for your entire life. But the truth is, that sense of security is an illusion, a momentary comfort that costs you far more than you realize. Carl Jung understood that we're drawn to what feels familiar, even when it's toxic. That's why her pull is so powerful. She doesn't promise you a future. She promises you a feeling of being wanted, needed, seen. And when you're starved for that, even the smallest taste can feel like salvation. You start to think that if you can just figure her out, decode her moods, anticipate her silences, become the perfect man she needs, you'll finally find the stability you've been searching for. But every time you try to mold yourself to fit her chaos, you lose a little more of the ground beneath your feet. It's in the way you stop trusting your own gut, the way you tell yourself you're overreacting, that you're too sensitive, that if you just wait a little longer, she'll come back to you. It's in the way you learn to live in a constant state of uncertainty, always guessing, always adjusting, always bracing for the next shift in her mood. And here's the most dangerous part. It works, for a while. Her affection, when she chooses to give it, feels like a drug. It soothes the ache you carry in your chest. It makes you believe that all the confusion, all the pain is worth it because of how good it feels when she finally turns her gaze back to you. But that's the false sense of security. Because it's not love. It's survival. It's your nervous system clinging to the only moments of relief it knows how to find, even if it means sacrificing your own peace. Jung taught that the unconscious patterns we carry are like magnets. They pull us into situations that feel like home, even when they're tearing us apart. And until you see that clearly, you'll keep trading your truth for the fleeting comfort of her approval. You start to notice how much you've given up. Your laughter, your lightness, your sense of who you are when no one else is watching. You see how you've made her moods the center of your life, how you've turned yourself into a caretaker for wounds that were never yours to heal. But here's what you need to know. Real safety doesn't come from someone else's approval. It doesn't come from holding your breath, hoping she'll choose you today. It doesn't come from sacrificing your own soul just to keep the peace. Real safety comes from within. From the quiet knowing that your worth isn't measured by how well you can manage someone else's chaos. From the strength to stand in your own truth, even when it means standing alone. And the moment you see that, really see it, you begin to reclaim everything you thought you had to give away to be loved. Because the truth is, her chaos isn't your home. Her silence isn't your safety. And the man you're meant to be isn't defined by how well you can navigate her shadows, but by how fiercely you can stand in your own light. The dangerous comfort of familiar pain. You might wonder why it feels so hard to walk away. Why every time you think about leaving, there's a knot in your chest that tightens around your breath. Why even when you know she's not good for you, some part of you still wants to stay, still hopes she'll change. Carl Jung had an answer for this. He said that what we don't make conscious becomes our fate. And this is your fate, the familiar pain you learn to call love. It's not her you're attached to. It's the feeling you get when she pulls you close, When she makes you feel like you're the only man in the world. It's the rush of relief when she finally gives you the attention you've been craving, like a drink of water after days in the desert. But that's the trap, because what you're really addicted to isn't her. It's the cycle, the highs and lows, the confusion and the clarity, the constant chase for a love that never quite stays. You learned somewhere along the way that love was supposed to hurt, that it was supposed to feel like work, that it was supposed to demand everything from you, even if it left you hollow inside. And that's why her silence feels like punishment, not just for what you did, but for who you are. That's why her sudden warmth feels like redemption, as if you're finally good enough, if only for a moment. But the truth is, real love doesn't feel like this. Real love doesn't make you question your own worth every single day. Real love doesn't turn you into a caretaker for someone else's wounds. The reason you're still here isn't because she's special. It's because her chaos speaks to the part of you that still believes you have to earn love. The part that's more comfortable in familiar pain than in the quiet, steady peace of someone who loves you without conditions. Jung said that until you bring the darkness inside you into the light, it will run your life, and you will call it destiny. And that's what you're doing now, calling it destiny, calling it passion, calling it fate. All because you haven't yet learned to call it what it really is, the unconscious reenactment of an old wound that was never yours to carry. You see it in the way you justify her moods, in the way you minimize your own needs to avoid conflict, in the way you keep hoping that if you can just love her enough, she'll finally become the woman you've been waiting for. But that's not love. That's survival. That's the boy inside you who learned that if he could just be good enough, he'd finally be chosen. The moment you see that, truly see it, everything begins to change. You stop waiting for her to become something she can't. You stop bargaining with your own soul for scraps of her attention. You stop telling yourself that your worth is measured by how well you can navigate her moods. Because the real battle isn't between you and her. It's between the man you are and the man you're afraid to become. The man who stands in his truth, who refuses to shrink to fit someone else's shadows. The man who knows that real love doesn't have to be earned, and that he never has to trade his soul for someone else's chaos. And the day you choose that man, the day you choose yourself, is the day the cycle finally ends. The illusion of being the one who can save her. It's the fantasy that keeps you stuck, the quiet hope that if you just love her enough, if you're just patient enough, you'll be the one to finally reach her. You'll be the man who breaks through her walls, who calms her chaos, who heals the parts of her she doesn't even know how to touch. Carl Jung warned us that this is the most dangerous lie we can tell ourselves. The idea that our worth is measured by our ability to rescue someone else from their darkness. It's a story that feels noble, heroic, almost romantic. But it's a story that always ends the same way. With you drained and empty, and her still lost in her own shadows. You think you're strong enough to hold it all together, that if you just love her better, she'll finally see your worth. But every time you try to save her, you're not healing her, you're abandoning yourself. Because the truth is, she doesn't want to be saved. Or maybe she doesn't know how to be. And so you keep giving. You keep hoping. You keep showing up, even when she makes you feel like an afterthought in her life. Because the fantasy of being the one she finally chooses is more intoxicating than the quiet knowing that you deserve more. You tell yourself that if you just give a little more, she'll finally stop running. But here's the brutal truth. You're not responsible for her wounds. You're not here to be her therapist, her caretaker, her savior. You're here to be a man who stands in his own power. A man who doesn't trade his peace for her chaos. A man who doesn't confuse her need for validation with love. Jung understood that the unconscious patterns that play out in relationships are bigger than you, bigger than her. They're stories that have been told for generations. Stories of men who learned to find their worth in fixing, in proving, in being chosen by someone who can't even choose herself. And that's why it's so hard to let go. Because it's not just her you're trying to save. It's the part of you that still believes love has to be earned through sacrifice. But here's the truth. No woman is worth losing yourself. No fantasy is worth trading your soul. And the moment you see that, the moment you really feel it, you begin to reclaim the man you were always meant to be. A man who knows that love isn't about fixing someone else's chaos. It's about finding the quiet strength to walk away from what asks you to abandon yourself. Because the real hero isn't the one who saves her. It's the one who saves himself. And here's the truth that this channel stands by. It doesn't matter how beautiful she is, how sweet her words sound, or how intoxicating her presence feels. None of that is worth the quiet death of your soul. We believe that too many men have been taught to measure their worth by how much they can endure, by how many times they can keep giving themselves away for the chance to be chosen. But here's our opinion, the opinion we hold above everything else. The only woman truly worth your time is the one who sees your soul and meets you in the light, not the one who demands you lose yourself in her darkness. Because in the end, you have to decide what kind of man you're going to be. The man who shrinks to fit her shadows, or the man who stands firm in his own light. The man who chases validation, or the man who knows his worth doesn't need to be proven to anyone. And that's the choice in front of you. Her chaos or your peace. Her illusions or your truth. Her endless tests or your unshakable clarity. The moment you see that and choose yourself is the moment you become truly free. This is the brutal lesson Jung left for us. No woman, no fantasy, no hope of being the one who saves her is worth trading the man you were born to be.